Today is the 16th of January, and so this is a day and time to reflect particularly on our teacher, Luang Chah, and his life and the example that he gave and the teachings that he has bequeathed to us. The many branch monasteries around the world, all the way from New Zealand through to California, wrapping the planet. They've been holding events and gatherings, making this an occasion to reflect on Luang Chah's teachings and particularly developing the sense of gratitude, appreciation, and consciously recognizing, what it is that we've received and how much that has helped us and can help us. I was reflecting today that of everybody here, there's only one or two of us who actually met Luang Chah person to person, face to face, or even had conversations with him. So for the vast majority of people that are gathered here at Amaravati today, this evening, Luang Chah is a name, an idea, a memory, a picture, a collection of words, a symbol. So I feel extremely privileged, grateful to have been able to be under his wing, even for a short period of time. I spent less than 2 years in Thailand, and during that time I didn't actually live with Luang Chah very much. Probably if you add it all together, probably about 3 weeks, certainly less than a month of time spent actually in his company in those 2 years. I was most of the time at Wat Pananachat. But certainly his influence was everywhere, and we had the opportunity to hear his teachings. But in a way, it was more important than being physically in touch with him or physically close by. What one got a sense of was that it was something he was trying to de-emphasize himself. He kept putting across steadily and quietly the message of, don't look at me, look at yourself. He was a very magnetic personality, very appealing, and many of the monastics, lay people wanted to draw close to him, but you could see there was this steady and consistent message. It's not me, it's you that you have to pay attention to. Don't just look at me, don't gaze at me, look at yourself, because that's where you can really make a difference. Also, I was I consider myself quite fortunate in some ways, insofar as I'd never even heard of Luang Chah or even Theravāda Buddhism more than a day before I actually arrived at Wat Pananachat. So I had really didn't have a clue. I was in a very vague spiritual search, wandering around Southeast Asia, and had gone up to Ubon province to get away from the Western travellers' beach scene, and so I had through a contact that I'd received, some people I'd met on the beach had told me about the northeast of Thailand, where there was no mountains, no seashore, no kind of glamorous sights to see, but the people of the northeast were the the most wonderful, good-hearted, kindly folks that you are likely to ever come across, that you would ever meet. Hardly anybody speaks any English, but they're the most good-hearted people in the world. And I thought, great. And hardly any tourists go there. So, of course, ignoring the fact that I was a tourist, but keen to get away from the young Western travellers and backpacking beach scene, and I took off and went to Ubon, and then just staying there one night in the house of some people who worked at the refugee camp. Then I was told about this monastery for Westerners that was close by, and I thought it was clear that I could only stay at the house of the refugee camp people for a single night, and so I knew I needed to move on. So I thought, okay, well, I'll give this monastery a try. And the picture I got from the nurses who were chatting with me was extremely vague. So I think Ajahn Chah's name was mentioned, and there was a Buddhist monastery, and they practiced meditation. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I've been keen to try and learn some meditation. I'll go there for 2 or 3 days and see what it's like, see what it has to offer. So that was 35 years ago, January of 1978. So in a way, I was very fortunate in that I'd never heard of Ajahn Chah. I hadn't heard of any of the other great spiritual teachers in Thailand, like Ajahn Mahabur, Ajahn Buddhadasa, Ajahn Tate, and so on. I hadn't really been in that domain, so I didn't have any kind of preconceived idea. I wasn't sort of looking for the great teacher, or had all sorts of ideas about how Buddhist monastic life should be or shouldn't be. I was gloriously clueless. Didn't have any idea. And so when I arrived at the monastery, and then was after a couple of days was taken over to Wat Pah Pong to meet Luang Por Chah. I didn't have any sort of particular interest actually. So well, he's the boss, so yes, they speak very highly of him. So he looks a bit grim in the photographs, but in those days the standard mode of a sort of highly respectful picture that was taken of a spiritual master, that they always seemed to have a face that looked like they had a mouthful of lemons and had this sort of grim, austere look. So the photographs of Ajahn Chah that I'd seen looked pretty off-putting, actually, to be quite honest. I thought, oh well, I guess they want me to meet the boss, so I'll go and meet him. But I was already quite fond of the monks and novices that I'd met at Wat Pah Nanachat. But okay, well, I'll go over and meet him, and so that was the first encounter that I had was just a few days after I arrived. And the main reason I ended up staying in some respects was because very, very quickly I found myself extremely inspired, and the whole way of life in the monastery, and going out for alms round in the morning, and the dedication to simplicity of living and harmlessness and honesty, it all had enormous appeal to me. But in a way, the real reason I ended up staying was because I hacked a large hole in my foot about a week after I arrived with a machete, and so that I was in hospital for a few days. Actually, so on the 16th of January 1978, I was in Ubon Hospital, recovering from having my foot sewn up. And so by the time my foot had healed and they'd taken the stitches out, I was in Anagarika. So that I kind of hobbled myself long enough to stick around and to really get a sense that this was something I wanted to try out in a more extensive and committed way. One of the things about Luang Por Chah, though, that was really striking was that as I said, there was this sense that he kept trying to, in a sense, push people away, and that he knew he was a very magnetic character. He had a very, very strong, very appealing personality. He was very endearing and very impressive in many ways. But he kept sort of sustaining this message, kept putting this message out to not be making a lot of him, or not to be sort of turning him into some kind of spiritual hero or some sort of star that was the center of everything. But there was this sense of being turned back on yourself. And one of the things that I began to see and realize was that in essence what he was saying is that the monastery is your teacher, the monastic environment is the teacher, and the Ajahn, the person at the center, is somehow as a catalyst for that helps for the monastery environment to sustain itself. But really it's not the monastery itself which is the teacher. That environment is what creates the conditions whereby we can learn most readily. And so that I felt was a strong message, and that it was really up to us as individuals, the people staying in the monasteries as anagarikas or novices, nuns, monks, that it was up to us day by day, moment by moment, to use the environment of the monastery, the changes of season, the ups and downs of the daily routine, to be what we learn from. And certainly it was delightful to be around Luang Por and to hear his teachings. Obviously it needed translation to understand what he was saying, but just to see him in action was a wonderful and delightful thing. But it was interesting how I would get this feeling of this sort of like a commentator saying, "It's not the point. It's not the point." Just sitting sunbathing, listening to Luang Por's teachings, or watching him giving a talk, or receiving people and engaging with others. That there was this sense of this is not the point, just to delight in drawing close to the great being. Certainly that's sweet and enjoyable, delightful in its own way. But what really matters is how you apply all these wonderful things that you're hearing. One of the things that was most striking, though, about Luang Por when you did see him in action was that you could never guess what he was going to do next. You could never predict, so that you might see somebody coming up and asking a question, and it seemed, as far as you could tell, something sort of very meaningful or significant, or a good question, and then Luang Por would respond in a completely different way. He would seem to not answer the question at all, but ask them a question in return about something completely unrelated. But also, you could tell that it actually went right to the very heart of where they were at. Or he would sometimes, if someone would come with a very erudite or a well-informed question or issue, and he would just ignore them completely, like they were completely and utterly invisible. And I think that was often in proportion to how inflated the person was, and how significant they thought they were themselves, that they would become invisible in proportion to that. And my grasp of Thai language was, and still is, very, very rudimentary. But one of the things that I could see and I picked up at the time, also because often there was other Western monks who were around who could be giving some translation if they were nearby as he was talking, was that over and over again, when people asked a question, he would engage in these kind of dialogues, and over and over he would get the person to answer their own question. And I remember once or twice being under his kuti, the main teaching space for the visitors and the day-to-day encounters with Luang Por was in the space underneath his kuti at Wat Pah Pong at the main monastery, and he would have this wicker, this sort of rattan bench that he would sit on, and then people would gather around under the kuti, and he would give teachings, and people would ask questions and so on. So there seemed to be this strange chemistry whereby he would help people to answer their own questions over and over again. It didn't seem to matter whether it was about meditation or about the community struggles and difficulties, conflicts in the community, or issues in the village, or whatever it might be, whether it was a meditation issue or internal or external. That over and over again he seemed to be able to steer the conversation so that the person solved their own problem. And on one occasion, somebody, we'd been sitting there for 2 or 3 hours, and somebody else remarked on this or asked him, say, Luang Por, this is amazing. Over and over again, people seem to come with these problems and issues, things that sometimes they've been struggling with for months or years, and they seem to be really kind of confused or in lots of doubt. And then they talk with you, and then after a few minutes, they seem to have arrived at the answer themselves. How do you do that? What is there some kind of magic that you're performing? Is there some sort of abhinihan, some kind of psychic power that you're employing? And he said, no, it's nothing psychic at all. He says, if you didn't already know the answer, you couldn't put the question in the first place. So it's just a matter of then helping a person to hear the question in a fresh way for themselves, and then follow it back to where it came from, and that's where you find the answer. See? Simple. And I remember thinking, right, how do you do that? But it was a very wonderful principle, and something that it takes a bit of time to digest, but it's really worth considering, especially when you're trying to deal with doubts yourself about your own practice, your own meditation. Should I do more of this? Should I do less of that? Am I working too hard? Am I not working enough? Should I do a different kind of meditation? Should I be spending more time sitting with others? Should I spend more time alone? Should I do more study? All of the hundreds, thousands of different things that we can doubt about in our life, in our practice. But if you just take that simple principle that if I didn't already know the answer, I wouldn't be able to form the question in the first place. I couldn't even be clear about what this doubt is if I didn't know what the answer was. So if you take that seriously, if you really take that to heart, then if you have a particular doubt, just in the process of clarifying the doubt, sitting down and reflecting on it. Okay, now what is the question? What am I really trying to figure out here? What am I puzzled about? What is the question? Just in that process of clarifying what the question is, you in a way you open up the path to where you'll find the solution, where that question has come from. So just as you could never second guess Luang Por, you could never predict how he was going to respond to situations. Someone might do something that was you feel like was a minute, minuscule infraction of the discipline. Maybe a monk's robe was not rolled precisely tightly over his shoulder, and there's just a little bit of cloth was sticking out, and Luang Por would bark at him and really just rip his head off. And you think, gee, okay, how's my robe? Quick, checking everything to make sure that you were tidy. And then, and 5 minutes later, someone else would show up with their robe kind of just dropping off their shoulder altogether, and their sabong, the sarong, all kind of skew-whiff and untidy with the sort of bathing cloth hanging down, and he wouldn't make any kind of comment. Like absolutely, there was nothing wrong or nothing to be remarked on in terms of their robes at all. How come that one got a roasting and this one is being completely ignored? What's the system here? So you could never second guess where he was coming from, but what you always found was this profound sense of trust that he was very attuned to people and attuned to the situation, and so that even though it might seem to be unpredictable or irrational, you always realized, you had this sense, and then time would show that he was actually being incredibly fair. He, in a sense, came from the very place of fairness, came from a complete attunement to Dhamma, attunement to the reality of things. And so he was not guided by a system or a preformed ideas or suppositions, judgments, but was really relating in a completely fresh and attentive way, moment by moment, to each person, each situation. He was extraordinarily observant, and another of the things I've often commented on was how, again, during one of these sessions or questions and answer and Dhamma teaching sessions under his kuti, somebody once remarked to Luang Por, saying, "Yeah, this is incredible, Luang Por. I've been sitting here for like 2 hours, 3 hours, and then every single person that asks a question or that you're teaching, you seem to be able to say the right thing for each person, and you seem to be able to know exactly what they need and give really good advice to everybody. All these different folks that are gathered here, and whether it's a lay person or a monastic or a rich person or a poor person or someone that you've met before or someone you've never met before." He says, yeah, and then the implication being, of course, you must be reading everybody's mind, because it's not uncommon to assume that everyone with a shaved head and a robe is psychic, and so forth. And so they were implying, you obviously got great psychic powers, that you can read where everybody's at so acutely. And he said, no, it's nothing to do with psychic powers. He says, you just if I have any ability to speak to what people need or what's going to be useful for them, it's just because I watch, I'm observant. He says, you can learn everything that you need to know about somebody just by watching the way that they walk across the yard. It's not psychic. There's nothing psychic about it. It's just if you just look at people, you see the way they walk, the way they sit down, the way they get up, the way they arrange their clothes, and the way they relate to other people. So just if you just watch and observe, just look at somebody for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you can really tell exactly where they're at. You say, there's monks, the ones who, whenever there's a work project on, there's the monks that always arrive first and helping get everything set up for everybody else, and they stay on after the end. There's the ones who don't show up until the kettle of tea comes out, and then they're first in line with their cup at the tea kettle, and then somehow when the work session restarts after the tea, they vanish again. And then there's the ones who arrive early and then work in a frenzy and then get really exhausted and then start arguing with everybody and then go stomping off. And then they're the ones who arrive quietly and steadily and carry on their tasks and looking out for others, helping others, working at an even pace, keeping an eye on what needs to be done, and taking care of what work is appropriate and tidying up after other people. You just watch. You see, there's all different types of character, all different styles, all different modes of being, and you can see, oh, he's one who sort of rushes ahead and then keels over exhausted. Okay, that's that type of person. And then this one is always volunteering for everything, and then is always helping everybody else. And there's this one who's always trying to find a way out of everything. So that I felt was also very helpful advice, and he was generally encouraging people to steer away from superstitiousness and dwelling on the mysterious or magical or those kind of aspects of the religious world that people tend to get fascinated with. And you would tend to put that all aside and not really talk very much about past lives or future lives or devatas and different realms of existence and so on. You would tend to just leave all that be and not speak about that or dwell on that very much at all. But rather just point to the useful everyday practicalities. And so that in that instance, that was such a useful piece of advice, saying, no, you don't have to be psychic to see where people are at. Just watch. Just look. Just observe others, observe yourself. See how things work, and then it's clear. And then by alerting yourself, acquainting yourself with how somebody functions, and you're seeing what kind of a character they have, then the way you respond to them, the way that you speak to them and address them and work with them, then it comes from your sense of how they function, where they're at. It was also the case with Luang Por that even though he was a very strong personality, he had a very striking character. There was also this quality of great flexibility or spaciousness in him, and that even though he did have a very strong personality, a strong personal presence, he didn't have to be performing all the time. He didn't have to be sort of playing Ajahn Chah as a sort of continuous performance. But it was you could see that it was in a way the means or the medium through which he operated, but he was not bound to that, or didn't have to. He was not subservient to that, or felt like he had to sort of keep up an appearance or put on a good show for people. But there was this extraordinary quality of emptiness within him that was, or you could also, along with the personality, in a sense, underneath, behind, and pervading the personality, there was also this sense of extraordinary spaciousness. I remember one time, many years ago, when Ajahn Chah had some kind of a stroke in 1981, and then suffered paralysis, and he couldn't move, couldn't speak, and was bedridden for about 10 years before he passed away. And so during that time, so he was first had his stroke and the brain damage from that in 1981, and during the Rains retreat of 1988, I had the chance to be on retreat by myself in the forest in Chithurst, and during that time there was a couple of the members of the lay community who had been long-term supporters of the Sangha, who had both just been diagnosed with cancer. And then another monk who was a close friend who's also been very, very ill for a long time. And then Ajahn Chah was laid up, paralyzed and bedridden in Thailand. So during this 3-month-long retreat, after a month or so of the retreat, then I started having a little kind of loving kindness and sort of spreading loving kindness and healing thoughts session each day for an hour or two, and I'm particularly directed towards these 4 people, And I forget exactly why that idea hatched, but anyway, it did. And there's a very interesting pattern unfolded, which was when I brought to mind the two people who had cancer, then I would get a very clear mental image of their faces and the sense of sending forth these feelings of loving kindness and well-wishing and such in their direction. And then when I thought of this monk who was a friend of mine, then the mental image was a little bit hazier, a bit more vague, a little bit more sort of transparent, insubstantial. And whenever I tried to bring to mind Ajahn Chah and sort of send loving kindness to him, or sort of healing vibrations, as it were, then I could get absolutely no mental image whatsoever, and my mind would just get extremely bright and spacious. So in a sense, what came across was that trying to create him as a person that was in need of anything was just not going to work. It was missing the mark, and so that rather than him sort of appearing even as a mental image, as a character, as a person, even to the extent of just a sort of mental image of his face, it didn't take form, and it was the same every day. It was really quite curious that there was just this. Whenever I brought him to mind and was sending loving kindness, particularly to him, there was this extraordinary spaciousness and brightness, and no personhood there at all. So that also brings to mind another little incident. Even though I just was saying a moment ago that how Ajahn Chah sort of discouraged the weird and wonderful, the slightly weird and wonderful story does come to mind. So during that time, when he was paralyzed, they built a special kuti for him at Wat Bapong, a nursing kuti, and there was 4 monks would be on nursing duties 24 hours a day. So they would go in shifts. So there were 4 monks helping to look after him day and night every day, and then people would take it in turns to be on shift and help do the nursing care and then feeding him, because he was completely paralyzed, so he had to be fed through a pureed food through a tube through his nose. And in order to learn how to do this, to insert the feeding tube through his nose so that he wouldn't be causing any pain, the monks who were doing that had to do it on themselves. So you had to know how to do it you had to learn how to do it in a very direct way, so that because Luang Por couldn't say ouch, that hurts. He couldn't make any kind of response at all. So people had to learn how to do that by experimenting on themselves if they wanted to be in that the nursing crew. Anyway, one particular monk who was a friend who was living here in Britain. At that time he got very into the whole idea of faith healing and laying on of hands and Reiki and such like. And he was very enthusiastic about this, and so he was visiting Thailand for a bit, and he volunteered to be on the nursing crew to help look after Ajahn Chah. And so during this particular night shift, he was helping to look after Luang Por, and the other monks had all sort of disappeared. So he thought, okay, well maybe I'll do some healing on Luang Por. And so Luang Por was just lying on the bed, and this monk puts his hands over him, doing his healing thing. And so Luang Por Chah has been paralyzed for several years at this point. Like, no voluntary movement is possible, right? So there, this monk was sitting beside his bed with his hands over his chest, sort of doing his healing thing. Ajahn Chah sat up, opened his eyes, looked him in the face for a significant moment, didn't say anything, and then lay back down again, which physiologically was completely impossible, but it was a very impactful teaching. Like, what do you think you are doing? Like, yeah, you might be meaning well, but it's you that needs healing, not me. So I would second guess that was the particular teaching that was being imparted at that time. Other things I feel very grateful for in being even a little bit close to Luang Por. I was, as I said, I was only spent about a total of 3 weeks in his company, if you add it all up. But the sense of his spaciousness wasn't just in kind of non-reactivity, but it was also this incredible kindness, and how he always had time for people. He had absolutely no respect for the clock whatsoever. If there was a good Dhamma dialogue going on, it could be 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, midnight, 1 in the morning. If there was a good Dhamma discussion going on, if there was teaching to be given, then he would just carry on through the night, and it was not uncommon for still to be talking with people under his kuti, and then you hear the bell going at 3 o'clock for the morning wake up. You say, okay, time to go, get ready for chanting. And then he might just carry on, or he might go and take a rest for half an hour or an hour, and then join in with the rest of the routine, be ready for the morning chanting, meditation, and go out on the alms round. So he had this infinite kindness, infinite amount of time and readiness to be available for others, and never held anything back in that respect. So that was an extraordinarily beautiful quality that when we think of, say, someone realizing emptiness or developing the insight into selflessness, anatta, we might think of that as an internal experience, or some just a change in their perceptions, but also it manifests as a tremendous generosity and a kindliness that was there, and that was particularly strong in Luang Por. There was no hesitation that he was available for anybody and everybody, and it didn't matter who you were, whether you were a total stranger, or just a young child, or someone who'd been around for years and years. There was always time for anybody, everybody, and that was this extraordinary generosity of spirit in that, and that a complete unselfishness on his part, and that also it was that was somewhat manifested in the way that he led the community, and the kind of community structures that he established, that he stressed this quality of unselfishness and working together as a community, the sense of sharing everything together and helping each other out. So joining together for meditation, joining together for work projects, joining together for the different activities of the community was a real spiritual training, learning how to get along with others, learning to make space for others, learning to be ready to give time to others. And that one of the reasons why there's so many branch monasteries, something over 300 in Thailand and around the world, and why there is such a strong community consciousness in places like here at Amaravati or the other branches, is because he made that a specific aspect of spiritual training, Whereas often in the other forest monasteries, there'll be the style, the basic mode would be go back to your kuti, be alone, don't talk to anyone, just do walking and sitting meditation. There'll be no communal chanting, no communal meditation, often hardly any communal work even, but just the emphasis on kaya viveka, physical solitude. But Luang Por Chah deliberately developed a methodology based around sangha and learning to function as a community, learning to be with others, and not to think of engaging with others just as an intrusion upon your peacefulness. But he saw for himself that there were many fine spiritual qualities that you were able to develop through being with others. And particularly because of his own character. He saw when he was a young wandering monk how that if he was off by himself in the forest or up in the hills and it was just him sitting under his mosquito net, he could have a grand time. He could be a really great, wonderful, wise, noble, super spiritual monk living by himself. But as soon as he had to go and stay in a monastery or be with other monks and novices, he would get impatient and critical and angry, and he'd be blowing up and complaining, criticizing, and very much drawn to restlessness and negativity and anger. And so he saw, well, if being by myself means I can be sort of peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, but being with others means I'm restless and angry and irritable, maybe I don't need to be by myself. Maybe the lessons I need to learn are going to come from being with others. So that was a very deliberate spiritual choice that he made. And he had this intuitive sense that I could play to my strong suit. I could just be by myself and just choose that. But I feel there's still defilements that are not understood. There's still attachments and habits of grasping that are not understood. So if I really want to free myself, if I really want to use this monastic life to genuinely and fully liberate the heart, I need to go where the unliberated aspects are located. I need to go to the places where I'm stuck, not to the places where it's easy for me. So then he made a deliberate effort to learn how to live with others and to get along with people that he disagreed with or had different personalities. And he often said how he developed far more wisdom through 25 or 30 years of living with difficult people at Wat Bapong and the other branch monasteries than he ever learnt sitting under his mosquito net out alone in the forest. That it was through living with others and the abrasion, the friction between himself and others, and learning how to get along when you don't agree, when you see things very differently. He said that helped develop so much paramita, so much wisdom, and that he realized he could never have developed, he never could have learned if it was just doing everything on his own terms and just choosing the path of least resistance for himself. So he found that so valuable and so helpful for himself that then that evolved as a whole style for our communities, and that's in a sense why we're all here. That's why a large piece of why we here living together, 50, 60 people here at Amaravati, because of that choice of his, that sense of seeing the value in not being afraid to work with the unwanted, the difficult, the things that are obstructive or things that are challenging, and so we are the grateful inheritors of that, and I feel it's a tremendous blessing and an extraordinary say, bequest, something that he's left to subsequent generations to learn how to get along with each other and to really respect each other and to respect the differences that we have. And in any monastery that I've ever lived in, there's always been a great spectrum of different characters and personalities, and I get that sense of how wonderful it is that we can, and people who would never choose to live with each other, all kinds of different dispositions and habits and inclinations, how marvelous that we can actually accommodate each other, we can find space for each other out of our basic respect and love for the Triple Gem. And not just because we're following a system, or it's like, you know, you're in the army, or that you're just obeying orders, and you're going to be punished if you don't do things in the right way. But it's not just a monastery is not just held together by force of will. It's held together by the individual hearts and the quality of faith and commitment of each one of us. So this day we have had this time, obviously it doesn't just stop at the end of today, but this day has been a particular occasion to bring to mind Luang Por Chah and his teachings, what he means to us. Maybe some of you hardly even heard of him before coming to stay here, and had no real sense of that piece of our background. Others have, he's been a major central spiritual figure for decades. But regardless of exactly how Luang Por Chah sits in our own individual spiritual universe, this is a good opportunity to consider, to reflect on what we have received from his life, his teaching, his example, and also how we can, say, fulfill his wishes as a teacher. As I was saying earlier today, I think that what makes a teacher happy is when the student follows the instructions. You know, that's what the teacher doesn't want to be told, "You're a wonderful teacher." You know, that might be gratifying or might be pleasing in some respects, but what makes a genuine teacher most fully pleased and appreciative is when the student actually learns the lesson. The student carries out the instruction and has shown that they've really digested the work, the task at hand, and put it into action. And so that I think, in terms of hearing Luang Por Chah's teachings and putting them into action, it's not just it's very lovely to say cultivate expressions of devotion, and so we have this wonderful floral decorations, the splendiferous and marvelous flower offerings and candles that we've been blessed with these last few days, and very beautiful and glorious ways to express our devotion and love for the teacher. But along with that, also to consider, well, how can I change myself? What am I doing with my mind in my life that also fulfills the wishes and the encouragement of the teacher? So one of the things that Luang Por Chah used to often say is, first of all we hear the Dhamma. Then, having heard the Dhamma, we need to understand the Dhamma. Having understood it, then we need to practice it. When we practice it, then we need to realize it. And then in realizing the Dhamma, then finally we need to be in Dhamma itself. And one of the books of his teaching is called Being Dharma. And that comes from that particular expression he would use. Not just studying Dhamma, hearing Dhamma, practicing it, realizing it, but being Dhamma. And then in this way, it's not just an inflated sense of self-view, like, I am the Dhamma, I am the ultimate reality. Like as an idea, sort of grasping an idea, I am the Dhamma. But using the practice, using these teachings to genuinely know that and embody that reality. So recognizing, oh yeah, everything, as in that reading that I gave before the meal. And he says, everything is Dhamma. Dhamma is nature. Everything is Dhamma. So if everything is Dhamma, that means your mind, your body, is also Dhamma. Your mind is an aspect of that ultimate reality. Your mind, your body, this world, everything is Dhamma. So that in our minds, oh yeah, but not my mind. I mean, no, you don't know me. That's I couldn't think in those terms, or that's ridiculous, or I can't see how that could be true. But I feel that in terms of Luang Por Chah's own realization and what he gave to the world, gave to us, and embodies for us, is that the truth of that when the mind is fully liberated and awake, then its reality as Dhamma is manifest. So when the words are spoken, then what's spoken is Dhamma. But also every action, every word, every gesture is in perfect accord with the time, the place, the situation. Maybe just to finish with another little story. When Luang Por Chah was in Britain in 1979, there was an occasion where there was another famous Buddhist teacher was in this country at the same time. They both happened to be introduced to each other. They were sitting together in this Buddhist center, and this fellow who hadn't met either of the teachers before, he told me this story many years later. He said that he hadn't really heard of Ajahn Chah or didn't really know much about either him or this other teacher. But he had come to this particular event, and there they were sitting side by side on a sofa or bench, and he said how it was. What was astonishing to him was that he could see that this other famous Buddhist teacher, this other monk, was very composed or quiet. But watching Luang Por, he said every gesture was magical. Everything was magical. It was like somehow he was completely tuned in to the people he was with and the situation. He said, I couldn't understand a word he was saying, but somehow he got this feeling that he was completely plugged in, completely alert to everything there, everybody there, and completely alive and embodying that quality of Dhamma itself. So, that was sort of the impression of a complete outsider, someone who'd never met him before, never had any kind of presuppositions, but it was just immediately striking. And when he said that, I said, "Yeah, that's right." And that's how he was. And in terms of this quality of being Dhamma, you can see when some being has fully let go of all self-centered attachments, self-view, and they have, say, completely relinquished the entanglement, grasping of the world of birth and death, then how they appear in the world is, in a way, is a manifestation of Dhamma itself. What they say, what they do is perfectly in tune with the situation, and that's extraordinarily rare and wonderful. But also, not just to exalt Luang Cha as a special being, but just to recognize that that's a potential that each and every one of us also has. That it's not like, he was he was Dhamma, but I'm not. I'm different. They left that bit out when they ran me off the production line. I'm different. I'm not so good, or I'm not so special. Well, he's different. He's a great enlightened being, not like me. But if we consider these teachings to be valid, if we consider this to be pointing to the truth, and how could your mind, how could your own nature also not be Dhamma? How could it not be? How could you, your mind, your body, not be part of the natural order? How could that be? It can't. So just taking a simple phrase like that, Dhamma is nature, just let that really soak into the heart, let that really be known, and let the implications of that, what that means or what that brings with it, let that really soak through your being, let that inform your actions. And then we allow that quality of Dhamma, that fundamental reality that underlies all things, that slowly and more completely permeates every moment, every thought, every feeling, every attitude. So I think there's enough reflections for this evening, and for your consideration.